General statement, there may be exceptions here and there, but broadly speaking, the performance of the countries in Africa has been very good. They have all embraced private sector-led economies. They have all embraced democracy. We have regular elections at regular intervals. So there has been tremendous improvement. So it's a myth. This myth is maybe rooted in the past, in our history.
That Amama Mbabazi, Uganda's Prime Minister. It's time for a quick break. When we come back, it's all about what Bernanke had to say at the latest press conference. It's all about markets which continue to edge high, and certainly all about Anglo-American Platinum's restructuring plans which were announced today, and less jobs than expected are going to be shed in South Africa. We'll unpack what that means for Amplats, what that means for the platinum sector here, what that means for the platinum price, and certainly what it means for the country's unemployment rate. Don't go away. Welcome back to Closing Bell Africa. Here's a look at the news driving markets on the day. Anglo-American Platinum is set to cut 6,000 jobs at its mines as part of its restructuring plan. Now, this less than the 14,000 initially proposed and will cost the company about 2.3 billion rand. Amplats is hoping to conclude consultation with unions in the next 3 months. It also is to keep open one of the 4 shafts that was slated for closure near Rustenburg, according to this plan. Now, the cuts will take 250,000 ounces out of global platinum production this year and a further 100,000 ounces in the medium term. Joining us to delve into the latest issues around this, CNBC Africa's Karima Brown. Karima, thanks so much for joining us. We've all been following this story closely. You've had contact with the trade unions. What is the response to this latest plan?
Well, Samantha, as you well know, this restructuring deal has been the subject of much negotiations. My understanding is that whilst Amplats have come up with the 6,000 proposed job cuts instead of the 14, there was another proposal made in Amplats' board meeting which says that they could go down to 3,000. The official word that I've gotten from the National Union of Mine Workers, although they're not prepared to go on the record at this stage, is that they're not prepared to accept any retrenchments. But we know, of course, that we are a long way away from that double-digit figure. You know, anything under 10,000, I think, is already a big indication of how far we've come. And of course, the new plans on the table is the subject, or rather the outcome, of a series of work streams that brought in technical experts to revisit the original plan put down by Amplats.
It almost seems, you know, with all those technical experts that came in, this is the best plan that suits Amplats, and also, of course, is not as bad as the 14,000 job cuts that were initially put on the table. But it seems like the trade unions aren't happy. Which trade unions, though? Because AMCU, which caused a lot of the trouble last year, has majority representation at Amplats.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, Sam. As you know, that there's been a big fight for membership in the platinum sector, with AMCU being the kind of new kid on the block. And of course, the entry into the sector was also accompanied by quite a lot of violence and instability. And they certainly have the numbers, but as it stands, those numbers aren't officially recognized because they're not the official union. Officially, the National Union of Mine Workers are still on paper, you know, the majority union. Of course, as a consequence of COSATU's alliance with the ANC, they also have a lot of traction with Susan Shabangu, who's the Minister for Minerals, and have certainly been impacting the process. I've been told reliably that the NUM leadership met with Griffiths in this week to put their proposal. So there has been separate meetings as well. Of course, AMCO's big difficulty is that it doesn't have infrastructure. It is not as established in terms of negotiations, and it doesn't have those skills that the National Union of Mine Workers has, but it does have seemingly the support on the ground. So
I mean, if NUM's been having these talks with Amplats, I mean, what's the point of them? They don't really have much power if it's not really representing the people on the ground whose jobs will be cut.
Well, I think legally NUM does have the power. They're the recognized union, so they certainly in all the negotiations, and we understand that next week the Minister for Mineral Affairs, Susan Shabangu, will be convening what is referred to as a tripartite meeting, which will include the department, AMPLAT, and of course all the unions. My understanding is also that there's going to be quite tough negotiations around whether there ought to be any retrenchments, which brings us to the announcement around mothballing of shafts. Now we know that the government is under pressure on creating jobs and employment. We are less than 18 months into an election, so the possibility of more job losses off the back of recent surveys that increasingly shows that our unemployment is going up is not going to be something that's going to go down well with Shabangu. So I think there is going to be resistance to the idea that you have any kind of retrenchments. There is, of course, flexibility in the plan in that if AMPLAT indicates that it cannot have a plan where it keeps the full, complement of workers on, there will be some elasticity. The big issue, of course, is what to do with these shafts. And my understanding is that certainly government is going to argue that if they are not mothballing those shafts, or rather if they mothball the shafts, then it means that they are profitable in the long run, but not profitable now. And we know, of course, that both NUM and the ANC have asked in that instance that those mines be put on auction and sold to other players that would potentially have a different approach to production and keeping on workers. So I think that's the kind of stick that I think Susan is sitting with.
So that this is not the only option.
Precisely.
Mothballing is not the only option.
In fact, mothballing indicates that there is still life in those mines and that they are being parked because from a financial point of view, from where AMPLAT is coming from, it's not profitable for them now. So I think that is going to give the government the kind of stick to beat AMPLAT with. And we know Mark Kutifani, the new Anglo head, has been involved with this process. His address to the shareholders in London indicated confidence in the South African market, and certainly the move from 14,000 down to whether it's 6 or 3, depending on what eventually is agreed to, certainly shows his footprint, over the process so far.
Yeah, certainly are following it, and the announcement at least came through this week, and tripartite meeting to look forward to next week. Thank you very much for that update. CNBC Africa's Karima Brown. In the meantime, the National Union of Mine Workers has asked Eskom to increase wages by up to 3,500 Rand. They also want the power utility to hike the housing allowance by an additional 3,000 Rand. The union says it's pushing for a one-year agreement rather than a multi-year deal. And Goldfields' first quarter production slipping by 11% to 477,000 ounces. Net earnings continue to decline, falling 34% to $27 million quarter on quarter. Headline earnings for the period fell by 67% to 4 US cents, and the miner says it expects attributable gold production for the year to be as much as 1,900 equivalent ounces. ArcelorMittal South Africa has posted a first quarter headline loss. That's after a fire at its Vanderbijl Park operations slashed steelmaking production. An estimated 361,000 tons of production volumes were lost through the incident. Africa's largest steelmaker swinging to a loss of 67 cents. A turn in fortunes is forecast for the second quarter as market demand stabilizes and production returns to previous levels. Now, the World Economic Forum is concluding in Cape Town today. The main focus has been on Africa's growth, with infrastructure said to be the factor holding the continent back. CNBC Africa's editor-in-chief, Godfrey Matizwa, spoke to Jeffrey Kleiner, CEO of the IDC, to find out more.
My impression has been good so far. I mean, it's day one in earnest of that. Yeah. Although we started yesterday with some of the other sessions, but I've been encouraged. Also, it's because not only the interest of Africans, but in the discussions that I've been, there's lots of people who are outside of Africa. Yeah. That shows that there's an interest in Africa as a continent.
Right. Yeah. And in terms of your one-on-ones meeting and the interest that you talk about, how strong is that? And are there any specific areas of focus for people who are looking at the continent from outside?
You've mentioned infrastructure. I think that's one area, and people have realized that that's an area where we can improve. Yesterday, in fact, where the discussion where I participated on is on the green side, right? As on the green energy, not only on the generation, but on the energy savings and all of that. The discussion was very good.
Should we be worrying about that, Jeff, given the fact that we're struggling to supply any kind of energy at all? Should we not then talk about green energy after we've first of all satisfied the basic needs of people?
I think we need to do both.
Right.
Because if we're not careful, the environment will catch up with us.
Yeah.
So it's important that we do that. And in fact, what was actually quite interesting is some of those that are not necessarily from Africa, in particular in South Africa, they're actually trying to learn from us, the South Africans, how well we've done that. So to show that, I mean, there's something that we do. I don't think we should, even the Minister of Water, or the South African Minister of Water, actually, Affairs and Environment, and she actually mentioned that that as much as we still have to do the conventional, we'll have to continue to generate energy using coal, but it's important that we look at the environment.
True.
Because not only because he's interested in environment as a portfolio, but it's the right thing to do. So I think we need both. In short, I mean, we need to do both.
Yeah. Now, of course, the funding gap around infrastructure has been with us for a long time. I remember the first time that someone actually actualized a figure around it was when we had Nigeria's finance minister, when she was still at the World Bank, and she spoke about that $90 billion annual funding gap for infrastructure. I had another figure today coming from the African Development Bank where they talk about potentially about 50 billion that's still missing, and how that's impacting Africa's agriculture going forward. Sorry, infrastructure development going forward. But my question is, number one, where do we find the money? Number two, how do we finance it in an innovative way so we're able to attract new capital that's not been coming to the party, if you like, or that's sitting elsewhere, parked elsewhere, where probably the returns are not as good as if that money came to infrastructure?
You know, there's a point which the CEO or the president of the African Development Bank said today.
Yeah, Mr. Kaberuka.
Mr. Kaberuka. What he said was, it is important for us to also look at ourselves in financing some of this infrastructure.
Right.
But if you look at our pension funds, if you look at our own savings as countries in Africa,
Yeah.
I think it is important that we also channel it, because that gives confidence from those that come out.
I'm hearing actuaries going, hey, don't touch those, and I'm hearing all pension fund managers saying, hello, this is our people's money here.
Obviously, we're not saying we should be reckless, but I think it is important that we take the lead. If we don't take the lead, there's development finance institutions you've mentioned that also says to the governments, help recapitalize some of those development finance institutions that are not recapitalized, so that we can take that long-term view. And we know there's Basel now, which is putting pressure on the banks in terms of the capital adequacies and all of that. Now, if there's no comfort that there is access to long-term finance, it becomes difficult for you to be innovative in ensuring that we have to participate in what is very key, the infrastructure.
Is that a conversation you've started, Jeff, with the government about potentially recapitalizing the IDC, for instance?
Well, I think IDC is probably sitting at a relatively pretty position.
Sure.
But at this stage, our balance sheet is very strong. What we are actually doing is we're leveraging our balance sheet. So we're not having that conversation yet.
Okay.
But I know some of the other African development finance institutions need serious recapitalization. And I think it's important for those governments to actually look at it. For us, as I must say, the investment that we've made in the past have helped us to continue to ensure that we play a role without necessarily going capital. But it also brings in a discipline that when you make those decisions, you are comfortable that they are sustainable.
True.
Well, that, of course, Jeffrey Taylor, CEO of the IDC. The market in South Africa is closed for the day, closing slightly low by 0.25%. 40,232 points is where the all share ended off. Naspers, a strong gain there. MTN stronger as well. Massmart also coming to the party. But overall, it was a bit of a lackluster day today and softening on this Friday. After the break, we'll take a look at what's driving local equity market as well as what's taking place on the Forex front. Don't go away.